Again. So, good morning, Los Angeles! Good morning. I'm Marea Chaveco. I'm a senior associate at the organization that produces the podcast Nonprofits Are Messy, hosted by Joan Gary. In addition, I manage new business development for the organization. And on stage with me are Christy Gressman. She is a partner in and the director of show development and production at Vale Presents. Nishat Kurwa is executive producer of audio at Vox Media. And Bettina Warshaw is partner management coordinator for the Panoply network. So let's say hello to our beautiful ladies. So I want to begin by asking each of you to define what it means to manage creativity. So Christy, you want to take that?
Sure. Well, to me, managing creativity is really about creating a structure from which the creative process can grow. And of course, as many of us know, the creative process, what is that? I mean, it's so big and expansive and challenging and vague. And the core question that I think about all the time in the many roles that I play in podcasting is, how do we create structure around something that inherently does not have structure that really will allow it to thrive?
Yeah. Nishat?
Yeah. I try to avoid thinking of, so everyone on a podcast team to me brings and has creativity that's essential to the final product. So I try, even though I'm often like the business person in the group, I try to avoid thinking of the process of producing as the business people bring only the structure and the creatives bring the ideas, but rather that everyone has, everyone is talent and everyone is a creative in their own way. And so we can all bring different components, but ultimately there is one person who has to essentially midwife, to use a gendered term, the creative process. And I think of myself as that person. And so in midwifing the creative process, I think that my role is to facilitate efficiency, to articulate the processes that turn ideas into products, and ultimately to integrate the workflows and different rhythms of the different personalities and turn them into a new organism, which is our podcast.
Bettina, how about you?
Yeah, just to build off of what you guys have both said, because I agree with all of that, and we'll touch on this more, but it really is just about communication. And how can we work with all these different creative minds or other producers, which is something I do a lot at Panoply, is work with outside producers, and make sure that they know what's going on, they're able to deliver what they have to at the right times, and they can then succeed to the best of their abilities.
So there are a lot of relationships in which creativity is managed, each with unique dynamics, right? So included in that are working on your own, which can be fun and lonely. Working with staff that you manage, working with your boss, also can be sad and lonely. Working with talent, and working between business and content sides of production within a company. So when you look at this list, what do you think are the differences and similarities to the task of managing creativity based on the nature of the relationships? Bettina and Christy, you both used to work together at Vale Presents and dealt with a lot of partners. So essentially, outside collaborators who may have different communication styles from those inside your company. What ways or strategies sometimes work in terms of managing creators who are making stuff outside your building and outside of your company, but ultimately for your product?
So Christy was actually the first outside person we ever really worked with creating Vale Presents.
True.
Because the podcast sprung out of Welcome to Night Vale, which was created by Joseph and Jeffrey, and the two new podcasts, new at the time, that we created to create this network, where one was made by Joseph, one was made by Jeffrey, and then we had this incredible opportunity to work with this podcast that had come to us called The Orbiting Human Circus of the Air, which Christy is the producer of. And so we were learning how to build a network, learning exactly what that meant, how to monetize a network, and now how to work with an outside person. So for me personally, there was a strong dose of fake it till you make it, but then thankfully, Christy being such a strong producer, business, and also creative brain, we were able to work together to figure out the best working structure for me being an expert and her being brought onto this network. So it's a lot just about communication and trying to share the right information, learning what we could share, what had to change, like how we can create a common language to make sure they were really successful and just created a strong network overall.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was all about kind of recognizing that we're in this together and we're figuring out this relationship together. We're figuring out how to be a network together. Like, as Bettina said, I came to Vale Presents as part of the Orbiting Human Circus. And then now my journey with Night Vale is I am a producer or executive producer of a number of other shows on the network, and am now a partner alongside Joseph Fink and Jeffrey Craner in the network as a whole, really focusing on running the network and growing it. And so, the things that Bettina and I started to figure out together, I think about those things every day because I, am every day being a creator, a creative part of a podcast, a producer, and then also a manager of a new and independent and growing network that makes weird shows and fiction and things that maybe other people aren't doing. And so I think it's really important to recognize that all of these relationships that we've gone through are different. And there is no one-size-fits-all approach. I think it's really important to not strive for a particular management style, but rather to strive to be able to react to the individual circumstances and learn what each relationship needs, and be able to be adaptable and to always be transparent and communicating and listening, and knowing that you're in it together.
Nishat, at Vox Media, you guys just launched a new politics podcast called Divided States of Women, hosted by Liz Plank and Heatha Herzog. Can you explain how managing creativity at multiple levels can become intertwined?
Yeah. So in this particular example of our podcast, Divided States of Women, and with other shows that I've worked on that have contributors at different levels with different relationships to the company, one thing that I try to do at the beginning of any of these shows is do an intake process that asks the same questions of everyone. That can happen in a group or individually, but some of the questions I ask include what's your work style and sort of in what context do you produce your best work? And sometimes a question that can lead into more detail about that is describe a creative partnership in which you've done your best work and what about each person in that relationship complemented one another and brought out the best work. And then more granular questions like, what mode of communication is best for you? At what time of day are you most productive? And then of course identifying your shared goals for the show. And then, so after this intake process that we do together, I then step back and then think about my role with respect to each one of these people. So in the case of this podcast that you mentioned, Divided States of Women, one of the hosts is an employee of the company and the other is a contractor. And so then I have to take all of the information that they've given me about how they work best, what their goals are for the show and their own career, and then think, all right, well, with respect to my role as the facilitator of this show, the producer of the show, what's my level of commitment to each person and the goals that they have within the context of this project? So for the contractor, I want to make her sound the best that she can within the context of the show, work on strengths and weaknesses. If she has a tendency to go off on tangents, like how can we manage that and how in each episode can she get better? Can I make a space for her not to go off on tangents during that episode and rein it in? For the employee, I'm thinking more about all of that plus long-term, what are her goals? What's her personal brand? And how can that grow within the context of the show? How can she build skills in doing this program that will help her and the company in other projects that she does for us? So that's sort of how I find balance working with these multiple contributors. And then I can give one really quick specific example that talks about my role outside of just the ideas that feed the show topics, but as somebody who's thinking about branding, marketing, promotions, audience growth and strategy. So often we'll be in sessions where these two women are talking about the show topic. They'll have a ton of ideas shooting off in every direction. And in one of these discussions, we were talking about, so the premise of the show is that they come from different sides of the ideological spectrum. One is a conservative, one is a progressive. And so we were talking about some social setting that they might be in. And Liz said, and Heatha expressed some opinion that was distasteful to Liz. Maybe it was that climate change isn't real. That's just an example. I don't know if that was the exact example. Don't quote me on that. But Liz said, gosh, Heatha, if we ever go out together, I'm going to have a shirt that says not with her. And so I like scribbled that down because I thought it was great. And it ended up getting cut out of the discussion. But then I go through my notes after each recording and I just highlight the things that might work for us in other contexts that I'm responsible for. And so when we started to do the marketing and create the logo for the show, we were in the planning session with the designers and I was like, oh, Liz had this idea about a shirt that says not with her, and we were trying to depict them together in a scene, and so we came up with this image that I think we can show you, that we are showing to you, where Liz was wearing the shirt that she talked about in one of their discussions. Ultimately, we did not get to use this image, and I think you also have the final logo for the show, which is that. I still really love the first one, but it's things like that that I consider to be when there are multiple kinds of contributors, I think about like what is the consistency that I bring across the process and how do I, at every point in the recording and production process, keep my role consistent and continue to integrate those aspects of my role.
I agree with you. I like the first image
Thank you.
better. It's so much more fun, especially
fun,
when
yeah.
you're talking about such a heavy topic.
Yeah.
So managing creativity comes down to communication, right? And a lot of this stuff on the screen really is just the basics of good team management. So let's focus on the specifics related to making good podcasts and creative projects. So when you're starting a podcast or a project, what common ground needs to be established, right? Christy, what happens when you're working with freelancers, for example?
So I work with freelancers all the time. We have a very large team at Night Vale. The vast majority of them are freelancers. And, something that I've recognized as a challenge is when people are brought in to do a very specific task. It may be a task that they have expertise in, of course, that's why we're hiring them. But if they only know very limited information about that task, then the results are not as good. So something that's really important to me is making sure that everyone on the team truly feels like a part of the team, truly is looped into the communication process, and most importantly is bought into the common goal, like understands what we're making and what the point of view is and what we're all working towards, and also knows that they have a voice as part of that team. They have a point of view that is valid and that I want to hear. And, I might be a little bit different in this way than some other people, but I really don't believe in like a hierarchy of opinion. I think it's really important for everyone on the team to feel as if, they can weigh in and their opinion will be heard. And again, just feeling as if you're, really transparent about what we're ultimately working toward.
That is just such an essential part of any kind of team building, right? Nishat, when creatives have, I love that we're calling people creatives. When creatives have competing agendas to the larger organization, how do you marry the two? It's something you had to do at Youth Radio in Oakland, right?
Yeah, so I can talk about a project in which we worked with, again, outside contributors who had one agenda, and then Youth Radio is a nonprofit independent production company driven by young people. It's also NPR's Youth Desk. And at some point before online radio had garnered a much wide audience, we decided to start an online radio station. And it was at a point where there had been a lot of consolidation in commercial radio, so there were all of these mixed DJs in our community who had really vibrant, amazing shows on commercial stations that got canceled. And so we had essentially like a street side radio station. We had put a stream on iTunes. We didn't have a lot of programmers, and so we offered these DJs, mixed DJs, a space at our station to come and be part of this thing that we called All Day Play that would have a mix of shows by teenagers and these professional DJs. Now, this was a clash of two very different constituencies, or could have been. The DJs wanted to come in and play, the songs that they played on commercial radio, all kind of cuss words, like inappropriate in a teen setting. The young people thought it was really cool that we had all these outside DJs come into the shop, but they were coming in not on a DJ schedule, like at 3 in the afternoon rather than 3 in the morning. They expected to just be able to bring their huge cohorts of guests in, 10 people at a time, which disrupted the young people's curriculum during the day. So one thing that we did, I believe in really open communication, especially when working in a big group, and for everyone to hear shared goals, and we have all touched on this a bit. We had initial meetings where we talked about what the larger goal of the station was going to be, which was to highlight independent voices and independent artists. And then from there, we did individual surveys. I think it was maybe Google Forms or something, to understand what everyone's individual priorities were. And then the process for the facilitators and administrators of the station was just to find where there was overlap. And so, there were lots of things that both groups had to compromise on. Like the DJs had to abide by this code of somewhat censored music that we were playing on the station, and very strict rules about like non-misogynistic content and like these cuss words won't work, clean music. But then we also, but if the priority for everyone was highlighting the voices of independent artists and musical freedom, then we said to the DJs, what can you contribute so that we can say often to our funders who are supporting this station and supporting young people's creative growth, yes, we're making some compromises in the tone of the station. It's not exactly what you would expect from a youth-driven station. But on the flip side of that, the young people are getting X. And what the young people ended up getting was that all the DJs agreed to mentor young people and talk to them about what it was like to build your own independent business as a creative. And so we were able to say, like, essentially, you got to give a little. And so I think just that middle ground of finding like overlapping goals is really important when you have competing agendas.
And what do you find are frequent assumptions that creatives make that can lead to trouble further down the road? Uh-oh, she's going back in the Wayback Machine. I could see the wheels going.
I could do a more contemporary example, which I think lots of podcast creators probably experience, which is who is going to have final editorial oversight? And I think that's just like a key question to answer up front, where I've often assumed that people think because I'm the EP that I'm going to have the final say over the final product. And it's happened even in the most recent podcast that I've produced, that at the 11th hour when I'm delivering the audio to mix mastering, I'm getting like frantic calls and texts from the talent saying, can I listen to this section? Like, I'm not sure I want to talk about this part. So at one point on a night before I was delivering a recent podcast, a woman wrote to me and said, in part of our discussion, I talked about an abortion I had, and I was like, are you including that? And I mean, we had a discussion in advance. I had told her that I wasn't going to use it, but ultimately I said, are you giving me the freedom to make that decision? She agreed, and then she panicked. And so I think, and just from that experience, I learned whatever it was that I did to communicate what final editorial oversight meant, I hadn't said it clearly enough. And so when it came time for the next episode, it was really important to have that conversation. Like, this is where your contribution ends, essentially. And from here, to deliver this thing on time, I've got to take it from here and run with it. And so that's just like a very small detail that I think is hugely important across any podcast you're doing.
So, Bettina, the next question is one near and dear to my heart. What kinds of meetings help with communication, and what kinds of meetings are a big waste of time?
I think, Christy called me out earlier. I love agendas. I love structure.
Girl,
in
preach.
meetings.
Bettina
I think
loves
it's
agendas.
A good agenda.
I'm such an agenda dork. Like, it's great. But so with Panoply, we have like over 100 podcasts, some that are made in-house and a lot that are made by partners and people that we onboard and make sure that they can succeed and really excel with Panoply. And so one thing that we do with them that I think is really important is we onboard them like very specifically. Someone yesterday actually referred to me as an orientation leader. I was like, yeah, it kind of is like that, where we have an initial phone call or something and just lay out exactly what we're going to be talking about, what the process is going to look like, who to contact for specific sorts of problems, and then again, what has to happen within the onboarding process, like when they'll hear from me again, what sort of information they should get. I just think that being so clear with people about what to expect and like really setting those expectations and then working as hard as you can to completely meet or exceed those expectations is so important. And then hopefully, if that's done right, you negate the need for those excess meetings where you're going back in and correcting or changing because hopefully the course has been set and you can just run with it.
Yeah, and for me, I find I like to collaborate on an agenda with the folks that are part of the meeting, and we throw it up on Google Docs. And if that agenda is not fleshed out, there's no reason we should be having the meeting. It's just time management is so essential in creating a free space for work to get done. So Christy, how do you manage and communicate deadlines for creative work? Do you feel like creatives are destined to finish everything at the last minute so that there's some tension to it and excitement?
No, I don't. I think that's I think it's a tendency. So I am the creative producer of a fiction podcast called The Orbiting Human Circus of the Air. And something that we're working on right now is actually our second season. And right now we're kind of in a script writing and demoing process. And, a challenge that, our team and my collaborator and I were having was, how do we fit this writing process into the reality of the deadlines that surround it? Because this story, really felt like it needed space to develop, and it needed time to kind of become what it was going to be. But then, of course, we also want to release a second season before multiple years have passed. And we want to, work with our entire team, our sound team, our production team in general, our actors, because we have a really large cast, and we have people like John Cameron Mitchell and Tim Robbins and Mandy Patinkin, who, have their own schedules, and we need to be able to be respectful of those things and work with them. And so the way that we're dealing with this right now is, firstly, just as you were talking about collaborating on an agenda, we collaborated on a calendar and a process and went through several iterations of that. So everyone who sort of had a stake in it was able to weigh in. And then, I think we articulated a common goal of allowing those limitations to help the creative process. Like, that's the intention, to sort of say, okay, here's what I've got, here's the time I've got, and here's the process I've got, and how can I let the kind of vagueness of creativity grow within those boundaries? And, just on a practical level, we're very clear about what the timeline is, what the process is, and what the calendar is. I try to be incredibly communicative about that, so everyone just knows what's happening all of the time. And feels really, really bought in and plugged into the process. So right now, something that's really working for us is, again, this kind of writing, demoing, listening to how it's sounding, going back and writing more sort of iterative process, and that's something that we came to collaboratively.
So the next question I'd like for all of you to answer it. I'm going to start with Nishat. When a project or a podcast has fallen apart, how do you save it? How do you get it back on track?
I'm actually going to punt that one because I'm going to punt that one. But I wanted to say something really quickly about the deadlines, if I could just add to that quickly.
Sure.
One thing, I know that spreadsheets were talked about a bit yesterday, and I just live and die by a spreadsheet. And that's the foundational doc that plans the entire show. And so the one thing that I think is important, though, in terms of transparency and showing the hosts the urgency of completing certain things, is I like to think of the spreadsheet as a funnel. At the end of the funnel is the ultimate product. And so I do all of mine in 3 sections. So the top is just the brainstorm, the idea dump, and that's the what section is where they can put all of their ideas. The middle section is the actual shows that we are planning based on these ideas, the different segments and the assignments, and that's the how we're gonna get to it. And then the production schedule is the when, and I just like them to see how we get from the top, the big top of the funnel, to the ultimate shows. I color code every section in that spreadsheet, and at the beginning of the week and the end of the week, I email them continually to look at the spreadsheet and look at what their assignments are, and so that's how I keep people with disparate schedules on task. Okay, now back to the question about when a project is falling apart. Can I toss that to Chrissy?
Sure.
Yeah.
So this is really hard. I had a show recently this was happening. And I wouldn't say that it was falling apart, but it was something that was and is a wonderful story, but was sort of in limbo. It wasn't moving forward, and there was a team attached. It was something that we wanted to work, and it was just treading water, and not ever really like getting traction and moving forward into something that could actually be released. And something that I did was actually just reset the entire thing. So I'm being intentionally a little vague because I don't want to give away details of people involved. But we basically just stopped. We assessed, okay, where are we in this project? What do we have? What are the parts of the show that are most important? Like, what's the core of it that we want to keep? And then everything else goes. And so we actually reset the whole team. So we kept sort of our core, creator, but then we brought in an entirely new production team. We brought in new creative folks for the team otherwise. We created a series of milestones and deadlines, again, collaboratively. And something that was, I think, at the core of it all was getting that new team really excited in a fresh way. And I think it really took having those fresh eyes and especially fresh ears on the show to sort of reinvigorate it. And then it really just launched from there.
Bettina, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just think it's important, so Christy, you were obviously very comfortable being okay, we have to reset. Mm-hmm. So having someone on your team, whether that be you or someone you work closely with, who can be the person who says, we need to take a step back, we need to reset, and I'm gonna delegate X, Y, and Z, or let's discuss how to take this moment and grow from here, because that can be really difficult to do, especially when you're working with people who are so creative and excited about what they're working on. It's hard to be okay, yes, but also pause. So having that confidence or being able to delegate that to someone who does have that confidence and that structure is really important.
Nishat, how do you give constructive criticism? I mean, do you have a model for feedback within the creative process and making a podcast? And does that model work for you?
Yeah, in the show that I'm working on now, I try to tie constructive criticism to suggestions moving forward, all in the same email. So after every episode that we do, I send an email that says, here's my postmortem from the last show. Hitha, this is what I think you did that really worked, and it was great. Let's carry that forward into every process. In fact, you're the designated booker for, Media Women of New York, or whatever it is. And then Liz, what really worked for you is let's bring your mom into every other segment, or whatever it is. Let's do the phone call with you and your mom. Or there's something really great when you're being self-deprecating. So how can we find a moment where you're self-deprecating with the guest and work it into every show? And then here's what didn't work from our last show, and sort of ticking through that, and then telling them how I'm going to address that. So I don't think it really works for you to be the person who's booking the main segment. You're a little too busy. Why don't I take that role on for the next show? And this is how that'll look moving forward. And then I take those specific points of feedback that I've just given about the last show and take them into the planning for the next one. So looking at next week, here are the assignments. Since you're no longer booking the main segment, I'm going to take this over. Liz, for you, it's the mom call yet again. So what are you going to do this week? So just creating a lot of continuity between those two sides of feedback and criticism is important for me.
Christy, do you want to add something to that safe space concept?
Yeah, I think as I touched upon a little bit earlier, to me it's really important a little bit earlier we were talking about creating a safe space for everyone to feel that they can both give and receive constructive criticism, but also thanks and celebration. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there's a one size fits all way to absolutely create a culture that feels safe and supportive in that way. I think it's just something that you need to sort of be conscious of and to be always, reminding your team of and working towards and modeling as a group.
Mm-hmm. And Bettina, how do you acknowledge people's contributions and keep people motivated, actively involved? Thank you goes a long way, right? So how do you celebrate success and build on that?
Yeah, exactly as you said, thank you goes a long way. I personally, as someone just working in the world, getting an email that says thank you can like shift my entire day. Like I really need that sort of like group, like we're doing this, or like you did this one aspect, great, like thank you so much, which maybe is like a very millennial thing of me, but is really does motivate me and is important. So I think taking the second to reach out to someone on your team who did something really, even if it was like the basic function of their job, but they did it and they did it like very well, and just saying thank you, or like congrats, we did this, just celebrating those little milestones with like as little as like, oh hey, like I really enjoy working with you, do you want to go grab a coffee, or like we launched this huge thing, let's have a toast for it. Whatever feels appropriate to the situation, I think is so important for group morale, which really is, we're all making podcasts and podcasts are really fun, so we should enjoy the time to do it.
Yeah, I agree with you. The kindness goes a long way. And no, it's not a millennial thing. It's an everybody thing. People want to feel like their work is being acknowledged and that they matter.
Another
More
thing that,
and more these days.
Sorry. Marea, just one other thing that I try to do for the hosts of my podcast is I'm always scavenging for praise that's everywhere. So like often I'll send an email like that rounds up comments I've heard from company executives. I'll go through social, I'll go through the reviews that they're never supposed to look at, just like collect everything that either speaks to their individual talents or overall to the project of what we're doing, because they may not see it all. And definitely the contributors from outside the company aren't hearing what we're seeing in Slack channels internally. And it is a big morale boost for them to see that. And I feel like that's part of my role as the cheerleader for the show. And it also helps with that idea of a postmortem. Like, this is what other people have also recognized that we're doing really well. And so like more of this, please.
Yeah, as ED of executive director of a prior organization that produced podcasts, and I was on the business donation side, whenever a donor comment came in, when someone took the time to give you, whether it was $5 or a sustainer gift or $100, any kindness that they shared about how the show touched them or how it impacted them, we would always go in, my development director and I would go in and, read it verbatim. Because sometimes on that day when you've been working 13 hours and you're like, why am I doing this? Sometimes you just want to revert back and see that email or hear that comment about how you mattered to someone and how you touched them, because ultimately that's what you're doing, right? So, when it comes, this is the money question. I know. When it comes to making a balanced budget, how do you balance the creative and the financial goals? I mean, money can constrain a creative process, or it could force you to be more creative, right? Depending. So can it be a good thing? Do you have any examples of how you came up or how there was a positive outcome as a result of? Bettina, you want to?
I'll actually pass this along financial
jump in.
questions.
Sure. I mean, so I'm coming at it from one really specific point of view, which is at Vale Presents, we are an independent network. We are focused on making new boundary-pushing shows that really, again, further what this medium can be. At this time, we don't make branded content. We don't have outside investors. We have sponsors that advertise on our shows. We do live shows. We sell tickets. We sell merch. And that's the picture of our income. So really, we've made a very conscious choice to put the art first and sort of not allow ourselves as a network to be beholden to others' interests. And that gives us a great deal of freedom. Now, certainly it's constraining too, because we have very small budgets that we can offer shows up front. And sometimes that's really challenging. I'm the executive producer of a show called Conversations with People Who Hate Me with Dylan Marin that came out this summer, and we've just been so pleased with this show, but there was a lot of cost involved. We were shooting video, and that was something that we had to be really creative about. to get that off the ground and to make it happen. And obviously we care deeply about the show and think it's really important. But we really had to think about how we were going to allocate resources there. And that's true across all of our shows. But like so of course making this a sustainable business and allowing us to continue to grow the network and make new shows. All of those are challenges I face every day and think about. But the really cool thing is we as a network, we have freedom, and so we can pass that freedom along to our creators. And we have a really strong point of view that we're about making really good art and allowing each show to be, essentially an independently functioning creative team that is putting forth the expression that they want to put forth into the world, and so we give our teams a great deal of freedom, and so we as a network also have to sort of maintain that independence. So that's sort of the benefit of it.
So we're a little bit short on time, but Nishat, you had another side of that you wanted to talk about as well.
I can give a quick example from the nonprofit context. So back to this online station that I helped run at youth radio called alldayplay.fm. We didn't have money to give the DJs, but the organization was providing the infrastructure of the station, and there was a lot of staff time that went along with that. So what we did as part of the process initially was create essentially a rate card that, even though we weren't exchanging, there was no monetary exchange, that allowed the DJs to see everything that they were getting and essentially priced it out. So like studio time per hour, this much. The time that we spend with our volunteer artists to create branding for your shows, this is the market rate. The time that I'm consulting with you to figure out like the branding of your show and the name and the promotion and using young people to do the social media engagement, this is what we bill at that rate, so that they could see exactly what the organization was expending in staff time, even if we weren't able to pay them. And then we also asked them to think about, what's the time that you charge when you go out to DJ at a club? Like, we understand that that's the contribution you're making to the station, so that both parties could feel good about what they were contributing, even if it, as I said, wasn't a monetary exchange.
So I just want to do our last question, and we're going to have to do it a little quicker than I would have wanted to, but how do you not let the tail wag the dog, right? So money dictates that, sometimes where the money comes from could tempt you to dictate your content. But how do you create, a firewall and maintain editorial control and not give it up to advertisers or foundations? Can you guys talk a little bit about that? Bettina, do you want to say something about that?
The first thing that comes to mind with that is when we all know like what those big podcast advertisers are, most of those direct response agencies, and they are buying your podcast for a reason, because they like it. They want to hear a well done advertisement for their product, which can go, you can read it really dry, or you can do something really interesting with it. Like one of our shows, YOY, hosted by Andrea Salenzi, has these really fun mid-roll reads where she brings in colleagues and friends to talk about the product and make the spot, feel like part of her show, which, yes, obviously it is branded, but it doesn't pull you out of the show so dramatically, which I think is, podcasting is an intimate platform, so you have to be careful about what you're putting like directly into people's headphones. And I think she's really successful with something like that.
Nishat, did you want to add something to that with just a few seconds?
It's okay. I think I'll pass just because I have a long anecdote.
I just want to thank you ladies for coming and sharing your experiences and being so open about what is sort of like the difficult, hardwired stuff to talk about to allow for creativity to exist. And I want to thank you all for being here. And we're going to have a lunch break. And there'll be another session on this main stage at 1 p.m. with Recode Decode Live with Kara Swisher. So I hope that this was helpful. And thank you all for being here. And you have been so inspiring to be around such wonderful, talented women during this time at Work It. And I'm so grateful that this festival exists. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elaine.
Thank you, guys. As Marea said, real quick, just please make sure you try and get back here by 1 p.m. on the nose. Kara Swisher is taking the stage with Eileen Chaikin for a live taping of Recode Decode. It's going to be amazing. So thanks again.